Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and the title of today's presentation is UFOs over Catalina Island, 3 Boy Scout UFO Encounters. Catalina Island is located about 26 miles off the Southern California coast and right in the middle of a huge UFO hotspot. I've documented more than 150 cases of UFOs, not only UFOs, but USOs, unidentified submersible objects. So there's definitely something going on in this area. UFOs have been seen since at least the 1920s, and activity is still occurring today. And Catalina Island is absolutely a prime viewing spot for all of this activity. Catalina is probably best known as a tourist spot, but it does actually have a number of Boy Scout camps on it. And the reason I wanted to include these accounts in this video is because these particular encounters all have some really interesting elements. They are all very widely viewed, not only by Boy Scouts, but by adults. They all have some interesting and unique details to them, and all of them involve what I would call a UFO display, where the object or objects know they are being seen or want to be seen, or are, in effect, putting on a show, perhaps. So let's just dive right into these very interesting cases. The first case I want to talk about occurred at Camp Fox in August of 1952. Camp Fox is located on the leeward side of the island, the side that faces the mainland, at about the midpoint of the island along the shore. And this was a bright, sunny morning when this occurred, clear skies. About 300 Boy Scouts and 50 adults were all lined up for a formal ceremony around the flagpole when some of the Boy Scouts started shouting and pointing up at the sky. Everyone looks up, and there's this UFO approaching. It appears to be a classic flying saucer, disc-shaped, metallic. One of the witnesses, Clyde Vrooman, he was a 13-year-old Boy Scout at that time. He estimates that the object was about 800 feet in elevation and perhaps 150 feet in diameter. A classic saucer shaped. There were no markings on it, no protuberances. There was, however, a series of evenly spaced portholes around the circumference. It was very shiny silver, like aluminum, he said, and came right over the camp and everyone and just hovered and started rotating around a little bit. At some point, it assumed a horizontal position. It was totally silent the whole time. One of the most interesting details that everybody noticed was that although it was a bright, sunny day with blue skies, the area surrounding this object was dark as night. It was like a black band surrounded this object. Something was causing this weird effect to cause the blue sky to look like night sky. This was something they all noticed, and it was very apparent to everyone that this was not a plane or a helicopter or a balloon or anything like that. It was far too low, and everybody was seeing this. They were shouting out the word UFO at this time. And after just a few moments, it moved off very quickly and disappeared. At this point, everyone was still very excited and talking about what they had seen, so the camp counselors decided to get everyone together and have them write up their testimony about what they saw, do a little write-up about their impressions of what they had seen. So that's what they did, and they didn't stop there. They actually took all these testimonies, some 350 testimonies, and put them all together and sent them off to the Air Force. They ended up at March Air Force Base, and what's very interesting is they actually got a response. Turns out the Air Force officials were very interested in their testimony, and they got a response not only from Air Force officials, but from the commander of March Air Force Base himself. Colonel Charles W. Bicking wrote back and in a statement said that he thanked them for their testimony, said that their testimony had been forwarded to Air Force headquarters, in fact, and he told them, and I quote, "While the information from these reports may seem only meager to you, when combined with other reports, it may possibly indicate information which will be of great interest to our intelligence office." This is an important fact because at this time the Air Force had begun a policy of ridiculing witnesses and covering up events. But it's quite obvious here that they took this report very seriously. I think perhaps because there were so many witnesses, viewing conditions were ideal, and this object was so low that there's just no possible way it could have been misperceived. At any rate, they did get this incredible response from the Air Force, and that itself is pretty rare. Another very interesting detail about this particular sighting, other than the fact that it was widely viewed and was apparently a display because this object came so close and turned horizontally and then zipped away, there was this black band of darkness surrounding this object. The main witness, Clyde, wrote years later that perhaps the cause of this sort of band of darkness around the object was from the engines of the UFO itself. Perhaps it used engines that affected the gravitational field around this object, causing the light to be refracted or bent in some way, that it made the sky around it not blue but black, like night. So yeah, maybe the gravity around it was so powerful it was actually refracting the light rays from the sun itself. So it's a very interesting case in a number of ways. And that's the first one. And the second case is equally interesting. The second case occurred at Cherry Cove Boy Scout camp. And this is not too far, actually, from the first encounter, near the Two Harbors area, not too far away from there. This is a more recent encounter. This occurred on June 19th, 1992. At that time, there was a lot of activity in this area. This particular case took place at night during a sort of presentation that the camp counselors were putting on. This particular Boy Scout camp was called the Tribe of Torquay, which was named after a mountain on Catalina Island by the name of Torquemada. And during this presentation, the camp directors and counselors had dressed up as Native Americans and were canoeing back in. And this is when the incident occurred. There was this bright flash of light from above. It was bright enough that it caused everyone to look up, and a large group of Boy Scouts and some adults saw this kind of star-like object, but it was very bright, and it was moving in this very small portion of sky in a darting pattern. It was zipping back and forth at right angles for a short period of time, and suddenly it darts off to the north where it stops and it hovers over the water. And here we have this sort of display type behavior when this thing starts to spin rapidly, sending off what appeared to be beams of light upwards into the sky and also downwards onto the water. It did this for just a few moments before suddenly darting off and disappearing off into the distance. The entire sighting lasted no more than a minute, perhaps less, but still, it was a very dramatic sighting and convinced everyone there that they were seeing something very unusual. So again, these Boy Scout camps are being treated to a very unusual display of UFOs, and it appears as if the UFOs want to be seen. And that certainly seems to be true in this next case. This next case is the most dramatic of the three by far, and was really the reason I wanted to put together this video. I was able to interview the witness firsthand shortly after the incident. His name is Alan Bergholt. He was 13 years old at the time, and this occurred at the Emerald Bay Boy Scout camp. This is again just a few miles north of the other two encounters, right along the coastline on the leeward side of the island, facing the mainland, almost towards the very end of the island, actually. And this case took place on the evening of June 26, 2013. Alan and some of the other Boy Scouts and camp counselors decided that instead of spending the evening at Emerald Bay itself, they would take a 2-mile hike along the edge of the coastline there to a place called Parsons Landing, which is another campground. It's a pretty remote area, very beautiful, with a nice view of the Santa Catalina Channel and the mainland itself. And as they got there and started to set up, this huge, thick fog bank rolled in, obscuring much of the area. They built a fire, they cooked their dinner, they set up their tents. After everyone had finished dinner and talked for a little while, they decided to retire for the evening, and everyone went to their tents. And this is when the fog suddenly rolled out. So that was unusual for this very thick fog to just roll in and out over a period of an hour or two maybe. And now it was a crystal clear night and really beautiful. Alan and his two friends lay in their sleeping bags in their tent with the flap open and were looking up at the stars. It was a very starry night, and they noticed not only stars, but what appeared to be planets, more than one, at least 3 very bright planets. And these were exceptionally bright, and they're trying to figure out what planets they might be when something very unusual happened that made it apparent that these were not planets at all. These very bright objects started to flash and pulse and brightness and kind of vibrate almost. And I'll just let Alan describe what happened in his own words. As he says, "What we thought was a planet caught our attention because it was so very bright. All of a sudden it started to vibrate, then slowly exploded with a burst of bright light for about 10 seconds, then dimmed itself and moved slowly to the right. It made no sound whatsoever and moved in a pattern that no plane or planet could do. During the time of this bright light explosion, the light reflected off the water. Then another 2 bright lights that we originally thought were planets started to do the same light explosion process, but not as bright." So Alan and his friends were totally entranced. This weird kind of silence had settled over the camp, and it was just eerily quiet, and they could not believe what they were seeing, because shortly after all these objects had pulsed and kind of vibrated, a 4th object appeared. And again, it was this very, very bright object. These 4 objects were all at varying distances, but all seemed at pretty low elevation, and one of them was quite close to them. And after they had pulsated and dimmed, it became clear to Alan and his friends that these were not planets, obviously, or not stars, because they weren't really exactly spherical shaped. They had almost a pyramidal shape to them as well, kind of a pyramid shape. They could definitely see this in the one that was closest to them for sure. And this is when another amazing thing happened. These 4 objects all brightened up at once, pulsated, shivered, and a UFO appeared. This object just appeared in a portion of the sky and started darting around and moved off to the east. It was sort of a teardrop-shaped object, and it wasn't long before these 4 planet-like objects, these spherical pyramid-shaped objects, pulsated and shivered again, and another UFO appeared. And this began to happen over and over again. There was a wide variety of objects that started to come out of these. Each time these lights would flare up, a group of objects would come out, sometimes 5, sometimes 10 or 20, and they would dart around, hover in place, but usually move off quickly in just a short period of time, and usually towards the east. Some would turn at right angles, some would go in other directions, and there started to be different shapes. So after this happened a number of times, they started to count the number of objects. And this went on for quite some period of time. As Alan says, and I'm quoting, "We saw this happen many, many times over the space of 2 hours. I would estimate we saw this happen about 50 times. The 4 large pyramidal sphere ships stayed in the vicinity for almost 2 hours, whereas the other smaller ships would disappear to the east. One ship stayed still for almost 2 hours, whereas the other large spherical ships moved around some, but didn't leave the vicinity. Other lights started appearing and going extremely fast, zipping across the sky. The lights were traveling about 10 times faster than I have ever seen a supersonic jet fly in the sky, and they would suddenly change directions. When I looked up, one went so fast it appeared to leave a lightning bolt trail on my retina for a fraction of a second. Some craft seemed to come towards us, then turn to the east. Others went directly east. The lights of these incredibly fast-moving, teardrop-shaped craft were red and orange. There were a few that were blue. I would estimate that we saw approximately 200 of these ultra-fast but small spaceships." So this just went on, and the boys were, while they were very excited, they were also kind of entranced and very calm, calmer than they thought they should have been. They just lay there in their tent watching this. None of them had any phones or cameras. They did know many of the other people there had cameras, but nobody was getting out of their tents or talking about what they were seeing. But it was obvious to Alan and his friends that other people had to be seeing this because this was very dramatic, very obvious. You couldn't miss it. And it was just going on and on. And some of these, of the 4 large objects, the one that was closest to them seemed to stay in place, but the others kind of moved around lazily, and at one point got really low. And they did actually see some of these objects go into the water itself. So they not only saw UFOs, but USOs. As Alan says, there were 2 identical bright pyramidal-shaped ships. At one point, one was semi-submerged in the ocean water. The other identical ship was hovering about a half-mile above the water. They both pulsed the exact same colors at the exact same time. After about 2 to 5 minutes of a synchronized light show with each other, the lower ship sank back into the water, and the one above silently moved over to where the other ship had submerged. It sat there over the same spot for a while, then suddenly it took off vertically at an enormously fast rate of speed and quickly disappeared. It was very obvious to Alan and his friends that these were not planes or helicopters or balloons or anything conventional at all. Some of them would come quite close to them. Some were much farther away. The ones that came close, they could get a really good look. What was most interesting to them is the huge variety of shapes these things came in. Alan actually drew these craft after he'd seen it. He drew them the next day, and there was a half dozen different types. There was spherical objects, there were triangular-shaped objects, rectangular-shaped objects, teardrop-shaped objects, saucer-shaped objects, diamond-shaped, just a huge variety. And they were putting on this display for, as Alan says, at least 2 hours. And I'd just like to give you another direct quote from Alan about what he saw. As Alan says, "A diamond-shaped ship and a U-shaped ship came towards us. They were closer and lower than the other ships. The U-shaped ships had a slight protrusion at the bottom of the U that we thought might have been a cockpit. That was where most of the colored lights were. There were 4 different lights placed in a perfect diamond pattern on the bottom of the ship. Those U-shaped ships were the ships that got closest to us and afforded us the best view. The lights were different colors, but they changed colors slowly. They didn't blink, but faded into different colors. The colors were yellow, purple, green, white, and magenta. In total, we saw hundreds of ships and probably a dozen variants of different classes of silently flying objects. Some were cigar-shaped, some pyramidal, some U-shaped, some stingray-shaped, some triangular-shaped that would break apart to become smaller triangles, some teardropped, and some small disc-shaped. It was like a whole flotilla of flying objects, but not one of them looked like conventional aircraft or made any noise. The silent phenomena lasted over 2 hours. This is from Alan's written testimony that he wrote the next day after seeing all this. As you can see, he's a very intelligent young man and a very good observer. And having seen these things for so long and so close up, they knew for sure that these were not conventional objects. They believe they're extraterrestrial. They don't think they're military. There is some military not far from this area. Point Mugu Naval Base, Port Hueneme, is off to the north end of all this activities, but it's many miles away. And I'm thinking, though, that they probably had to be aware of what was going on. If so, they did not send any Air Force jets out after this. And Alan and his friends and the other Boy Scouts and some of the camp counselors were apparently the only ones who saw this, or at least the only ones who reported it. Now here's another very strange detail about this case. At some point while all of this was going on, Alan and his two friends were looking towards the mainland, and they could see it very close up. Much more close than you could normally see it. Normally you can see the mainland, but you can't make out individual buildings or cars or anything like that. But as they were looking at the mainland across, at least 26 miles of open ocean here, actually more than that, because the closest is, towards Rancho Palos Verdes. So this is considerably more miles than that. They were looking across towards this expanse of water, and they could see individual homes. They could see individual cars and their headlights going along the Pacific Coast Highway. This is impossible. There's just no way you could see these details that close up. So somehow it was magnified. And they studied the coastline and actually saw this lighthouse. It was just a sort of typical lighthouse. But later, in the days following this incident, they were able to see this lighthouse closely enough that they could identify it, and they believe it was the lighthouse at Point Conception, which, by the way, is more than 90 miles away. This is beyond where they should be able to see. So if they're correct in identifying this lighthouse, and it's the only lighthouse that matches up to the details they saw, then there's definitely some weird effect going on here. Perhaps the space-time continuum is being bent in some way, or this is a portal that's affecting or causing a distortion in the distance between Catalina Island and the mainland here. At any rate, it's a very strange effect which all of them noticed and could not explain. As Alan says, I have no explanation for how we could have possibly seen these landmarks so effortlessly that were so far away. So at this point, the activity is really ramping up. It's clearly some sort of sky show. There's a lot of objects at one point zooming all around in the sky at once. It became so active that they weren't able to keep an eye on any one thing. They actually decided that they were going to divide the sky up and each watch a portion of the sky because so many things were happening at once. It was like all coming to a climax. As Alan says, and again I'm quoting, "Soon many lights and movements started happening quickly and all at once. There were so many objects that it was hard to keep track of them. My 3 friends and I decided to divide up the sky so we could look in different directions. I was looking to the north. We only did that for a little while, as one of us would point out something incredible to our friends, and then we would all look. We were incredibly excited and could barely believe our eyes as to what we were seeing. Some of the scouts were asleep through all this, but my friends and I were extremely excited, and we saw other scouts and adults along the beach, also intently watching this most amazing sky show. The whole event seemed to be sort of orchestrated by these 4 large pyramidal sphere-shaped objects, because each time they would pulse and dim and vibrate, a new wave of objects would appear. So perhaps it was these objects which were sort of causing this weird magnification of the coastline, this weird sort of warping effect, and this weird, perhaps, maybe it's a portal that's allowing these objects to come through. But there were so many of these objects that was kind of the most amazing thing of all. And there was just no way this could have been military with that number of objects. They were really beautiful, many different types of objects. There was just no way that they could explain this. And finally it ended, as Alan says, eventually the ships flew off within a few minutes as if they were following some silent signal. The sky ships all departed, and the fog appeared to roll in over the mainland. Immediately after this incident occurred, the fog came rolling back in. And I don't think this is a coincidence either, because we do have weird fog banks that appear or disappear in association with dramatic UFO encounters. And that seems to be what happened in this case. It's a truly incredible encounter, and it actually had lasting repercussions. Alan and his 3 friends were completely amazed, and they wanted to talk about it the next day, but the camp counselors who saw this activity refused to talk about it and didn't want to talk about it, and everyone it became sort of taboo to even talk about it. Alan was able to find some other witnesses. He learned that some people had cameras and cell phones and tried to take pictures but could not, because the cameras and the cell phones powered down. So it was a really amazing event that Alan will never forget, and he and his friends thought it was important that it be recorded for posterity, and that's why he agreed to an interview. It's had a very strong and profound effect on him and has convinced him of the reality of UFOs. He has no idea why he was so lucky to see this, but he's amazed that he did. And as he says, and again I'm quoting, "At least 20 scouts, including myself, witnessed all or part of this amazing event on the clear June 26th evening. Some boys were from my troop, others were from other troops in other cities. There were also several adult staff members who saw this. The adults did not appear to want to discuss this matter the next day. I felt that they were unsure how to handle the amazing events of the previous night and feared that they would get into trouble if they discussed what many of us had witnessed. It seemed pretty clear to me the next day that it was not a good idea to discuss what we had seen, as the leaders disapproved of it." And as I mentioned, some people did try to film it. One guy had a GoPro camera, and he said it actually powered down to 0. It had been at 80% when he had it, and after the incident, it went back up to normal 80%. And the same thing happened with one gentleman who had a digital camera, actually. So when he tried to film the event, it became mysteriously drained down to about 2%, so that none of them were able to take pictures. And this is certainly something we've seen in other cases where people try to take pictures, the person's camera fails. So yeah, I mean, there are very many strange elements about this incredible event, and it was very widely viewed. and I think has some important things to say about not only the UFO phenomena, but the activity that's going on in this area. All three of these cases do. And that's why I wanted to, again, include them, because they're all very widely viewed. These were, at least two of them, very low-level sightings. All three involve what appeared to be a display. And this last incident has electromagnetic effects and this very strange sort of space warping effect, where the witnesses were able to see the coastline magnified to an incredible degree. So I don't even know how to explain that, and neither do the witnesses. It's a very interesting encounter, to say the least. And all of these cases are presented in my book, Undersea UFO Base, an in-depth investigation into USO activity in the Santa Catalina Channel. And as I said, I mean, these are only three of more than 150 documented cases in this area. I think it's probably a lot more than that, because most people do not report their encounters. And the fact that Alan and his friends and the other witnesses saw so many objects makes me wonder what exactly is going on in this area, and could there possibly be a base? And I've got other reasons for thinking that, but that's actually the topic for another show. Until then, once again, thanks for listening, and keep having fun.